All right. Gabe, do you need any more time for anything?
I'm ready when you are.
Okay, well, I guess we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. I'm Suzanne Pruitt. I'm with AREC Communications, and I'm here at the Tidewater AREC today. Matthew Chappell is normally on here to welcome everybody to the seminar sessions, but he is not able to be with us, so I am here on his behalf. Today's program will focus on the Shenandoah Valley AREC. So very excited about hearing all about what's happening there. And just a couple of reminders for you. At the end of the program, we will take time for some questions if anybody has any. And I will also make a few announcements regarding upcoming field days. And one other thing before I turn it over is that we are recording. And if for any reason you have missed some of the previous AREC seminars, all of those are available online, and I will link that into the chat at the end of today's program. So without further delay, I'm going to turn it over to Superintendent Gabe Pent at the Shenandoah Valley AREC. Welcome, Dr. Pent.
All right. Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you for organizing these sessions as well. And
Sure.
thanks to Matthew for initiating. It's been great to hear what some of the other ARECs are doing and a good opportunity to showcase some of what we are working on today here at the Shenandoah Valley AREC. Just to give a quick snapshot of the context of the ARECs, this is the current map, I believe, of the agricultural research and extension centers across Virginia. So we are located a little bit south to the dot that you currently see there, denoting the Shenandoah Valley AREC. We are on the county line between Augusta and Rockbridge County, on a bit of a ridge where the water to the north flows into the Shenandoah River, the water to the south flows to the James River. So geographically or physiographically, we are the headwaters of the Shenandoah Valley. You actually, if you have traveled up and down Interstate 81 past exit 205, which is home to the largest truck stop on the East Coast, you also have driven through the AREC, even if you haven't stopped by. The university owns property on both sides. So if you've seen this sign heading southbound towards Blacksburg, you actually are in the middle of AREC property, both sides of the interstate. And we're the office and the visitor center is just a short distance from the actual exit. So next time you're driving by, make sure you stop in. Here's an example. Here's what the sign looks like in the entrance. So as you're coming down the Rafine Road exit there from Interstate 81, this is what you'll find as you enter the farm. I'm going to try to play this video if I can. This will give you a little bit of a sense of what the AREC looks like as you're coming down Rafine Road, McCormick Farm Circle there on the left. That brick building there to your left is our office. It was also the McCormick Homestead that was built in 1831. Most of our acreages, which is now about 965 acres, is made up of pasture and hayland, which is what you're mostly seeing. But there is about a third of the acreage in woods. And so a lot of our efforts also center around forest management and demonstration. This is our main shop complex and feeding barn facility. Immediately in the foreground is the memorial area, which I'll talk about in a little bit related to the history of the McCormick family. There you see Interstate 81 snaking up through the top of the frame. And then again, just panning over more of what the AREC looks like in June, July timeframe. The long white barn there in front of you is the Ram test facility. I'll talk about that a little later. And then all of the timber that you see in the frame all the way up to Route 11 is part of AREC property. So that'll give you a little bit of a sense of what the AREC looks like. Those are the Blue Ridge Mountains there on the left-hand side of this picture now, roughly going southwest to northeast orientation. Let's see if I can go to the next frame. There we go. All right. So as I mentioned, the McCormick family owned this farm. This was the site of the invention of the first mechanical reaper in 1831. Cyrus McCormick is credited with inventing that reaper in the blacksmith shop, which is the log building there on the left-hand side, the far left log building. So he invented the reaper in 1831. Their family owned the farm up until the 50s, and at which time they donated it to Virginia Tech, and it opened a couple of years later as an AREC, and it's operated as such since then. We still keep these buildings open, these historic buildings open to the public every day of the year. We open them up for self-guided tours as a tribute and commemoration to the invention of that reaper. The second log structure that you see there is the historic grist mill. This grist mill is still operational as it was in the late 1700s when it was first built. And so these two buildings gives visitors some opportunity to learn a little bit about the history of that era and also the significance of the invention of that mechanical harvesting device almost 200 years ago. Here are a few facts about the AREC. The family donated the farm in 1954. It opened a couple years later as an official AREC. Currently, we farm about 962 acres. Some of that is leased, some of it from the foundation, as well as private landowners and Rockbridge County. Currently, we've got two individuals on our staff, plus myself as superintendent, and then we have part-time help in the office, Amanda Kirby, if you've ever had a chance to meet with her. We're about an hour and a half from campus, so we don't house any faculty here. And instead, most faculty travel here for projects along with their graduate students from the main campus, in addition to the extension agents and specialists from other ARECs that we work with. In any given year, we usually have about 8 to 10 faculty that have some sort of project taking place at the farm. We're also a training center for the vet school. The vet school does all of our herd health work, or most of it, and they bring students with them when they're working on either the rams or the cattle. And so we're usually training vet students, maybe a dozen to 2 dozen in any given year on different sort of activities. In many cases, this is the first farm that these vet students have had an opportunity to work on. So it's a great experience and opportunity for them to learn in a real farm environment. The historic buildings draw quite a crowd, not just because of the significance of what happened here on the farm 200 years ago, but also due to the proximity of the farm to the interstate. So we've got a little guest book that sits in the museum here at the farm, and generally over 2,000 people sign in to that guest book every year. So likely the number of visitors to this little museum is closer to 10,000 every year, considering most people don't really sign that guest book. So a pretty significant amount of people that come and visit the historic part of the farm, as well as the AREC functioning part of the farm as well. We have a leadership council made up of stakeholders representing a diversity of backgrounds, both cattle, forestry, and history. And so our current membership is 15 stakeholders. They're very engaged and helpful to us. And just also want to highlight, we are open every day of the year for these historic buildings for people to come visit, but also as a research station that manages livestock, we have staff that are here to feed and check and take care of livestock every day of the year, holidays, weekends, and on a 24-hour basis as needed. This is the mission of our AREC, based on our strategic plan currently. And the primary focus is to create, integrate, and share knowledge to improve the viability of 3 industries in this region: livestock, forage, and forestry. We also, of course, because of the opportunity as it relates to the McCormick farm, have an opportunity to engage with a lot of students and passerbys as they visit the farm. And so it also is an opportunity to serve as an advocate for agriculture on a broader scale. I wanted to share a couple statistics from the Ag Survey just as a way of highlighting our potential impact across the entire state. So this is the market value of top 20 commodities. This is for the entire Commonwealth of Virginia. And you can see that the number one commodity it would be poultry and eggs, which the Shenandoah Valley is a significant producer in that area. But cattle and calves, beef cattle specifically, is number two. When you throw in hay crops and small ruminants, the impact on the economic output of agriculture in Virginia is significant for the entire state. And so the work that we work on with livestock here in the Shenandoah Valley really has applicability across the entire Commonwealth and affects some of the larger industries in the ag sector. When we think about farm land use, this is the amount of farmland in Virginia that's made up of different types of ground, whether that's pasture, woods, crop, or other buildings. And as we focus both on pasture and woodlands, those two types of land management make up over 50% of the entire farm acreage of Virginia. So the work again that we do here has a significant economic impact as well as an impact on land across the entire Commonwealth. When we look a little more specifically at the Shenandoah Valley and some of the representative counties around us, again, we're in Augusta and Rockbridge County, but some of our neighbors in the Shenandoah Valley include Page, Rockingham, and Shenandoah. All of these are large crop producing regions, but also are some of the largest and have the largest numbers of livestock, both poultry. Augusta, Page, and Rockingham specifically are ranked very high in the state in the number of poultry producers and also number of beef cattle and calves. So our work, of course, being here in the southern Shenandoah Valley, serves the beef cattle industry, which is a large part, dominant part of our local Shenandoah Valley economy. This is just a quick diagram of the different types of stakeholders that we serve. If you think about the three components of our work here at the AREC, forage livestock systems, forestry systems, and then also the history and preservation of the story of the McCormick Reaper. There's some interaction and intersection between all the different groups, but also it illustrates the broad application and outreach that we can have through the different industries and sectors that we serve. More specifically, I wanted to focus on some more recent changes as we plan for the next number of years here at the AREC and some research studies that we are planning. Three different categories that I've highlighted on this slide. This is a map of most of the AREC, not all the AREC, but most of the AREC and some of the pasture resources that we have. And so we've got three main focus areas as I see it in the coming years that we're developing. So I'm going to briefly talk about some of our work with tall fescue, and then also some work with silvopasture. And then we've got Dr. Ben Tracy here, who's been working at the AREC for a number of years, who can provide a little overview of some of his work as well. So tall fescue is the number one forage plant in Virginia. It's a very productive plant, very nutritious. It's got some issues, though, related to its management. It happens to have a symbiotic relationship with a fungus that lives inside the grass. This fungus helps the grass survive, but it also produces some chemicals called ergot alkaloids that inhibit blood circulation in cattle. It actually causes vasoconstriction. So what ends up happening is the animals that are grazing tall fescue, which is, again, the primary forage in Virginia grazing systems, they undergo or they have impaired thermoregulation. Particularly in the summertime, we see this exhibited by heat stress as they're unable to properly and efficiently pump blood through their body. This is an X-ray image of hoof with normal circulatory system there on the left hand of your screen. The blood vessels extend all the way to the hoof, whereas an animal that's grazing this fungal infected tall fescue has vasoconstriction. And as you can imagine, this is problematic as they try to pump blood around and cool themselves and maintain their body temperatures. So this is a typical scene that you might see in Virginia. This isn't at the AREC, but we see a lot of wallowing and water searching behavior as animals try to cool themselves because they're grazing this forage. These are some data from a number of years ago, basically just showing that calving rates suffer considerably when animals are on this type of tall fescue, which would be the black bars, endophyte infected tall fescue, as compared to the tall fescue without the endophyte, shown there with calving rates in green. And just to illustrate the level of problem that this is in Virginia, a number of years ago, we did a survey of pastures across Virginia to try to figure out how much of the pastures are infected with this toxic endophyte or fungus. And the vast majority of the fields, well, all of the fields came back as infected, and most of them were over 65% infected with the fungus, which indicates that most of the fields in Virginia, if they've been here for a number of years, are highly infected with this toxic fungus. So this is a widespread problem and a real issue for productivity in Virginia cattle farms. So a number of years ago, the idea was when this was found out to be a problem, some seed companies developed cultivars of tall fescue that don't have the endophyte. They created endophyte-free varieties of tall fescue. And unfortunately, the endophyte is what helps this grass persist over time and survive in our type of environment. And so those endophyte-free varieties, while they didn't hurt livestock, they didn't persist very long. And so those pastures started to die out. Around the turn of the century, there was some work to develop novel endophyte cultivars of tall fescue. So these are cultivars of tall fescue that have an endophyte that do not produce ergot alkaloids, which are those chemicals that are detrimental to livestock. And because they still have an endophyte that helps with other stresses in the environment, these novel endophyte varieties have been shown to persist as well as the original toxic endophyte infected tall fescue. And so this is one area we're starting to focus more on, is how do we integrate these new cultivars of the novel endophyte tall fescue into our grazing systems, and what impact does that have on animal performance? This is an image that shows cattle. This isn't from here, but other Virginia Tech facilities a number of years ago. The animals in the foreground are grazing the toxic endophyte infected tall fescue. The animals in the background that are out in the field are grazing the novel endophyte infected tall fescue cultivars. And so you can see the difference, not just in animal performance, but also animal welfare for this new type of forage. We've done some measurements and tracked animal body temperature when they're on these two types of forage. These are vaginal temperature loggers that we put into heifers so we can track their body temperature, their core temperature over a day. Vaginal temperature there on the y-axis, the animals grazing the toxic endophyte infected tall fescue are the black lines, and then the green would be the healthy animals that aren't grazing these toxins. And you can see significantly lower temperatures, body temperatures, for those animals grazing the non-toxic forage, particularly in the afternoon. The animals that are grazing toxic endophyte infected tall fescue actually are exhibiting low-grade fevers. Over 104 degrees is considered a fever, which just illustrates their inability to properly cool themselves when they're on that type of forage. So that leads me to what we're trying to do over the next number of years. This was a study out of Arkansas about over 10 years ago, where they looked at different proportions of novel tall fescue in a grazing system. So they had some fields or some grazing systems that were completely toxic, the old type of tall fescue, and then they had other cow-calf systems that were completely converted to the new type of tall fescue. And then they had a mixture where part of the grazing system was the old type of tall fescue, and then a quarter of the grazing system was converted to these novel endophyte cultivars of tall fescue. And for these spring calving herds, what they found is that there's a substantial improvement in calving rates just by having a small proportion of the farm converted to novel endophyte. But there wasn't quite the same weaning weight advantage that they saw by converting the entire farm to novel endophyte. And so there are some partial benefits. Converting a whole farm to novel endophyte is problematic. It's expensive. It takes time, and it can't be done on some portions of ground. So these data were very intriguing because it illustrated that even just converting a portion of the farm could get some benefit, at least for spring calving herds. So at the Shenandoah Valley AREC, we are primarily fall calving. We're also at the more northern region where tall fescue is grown compared to Arkansas anyway. And so our plan is to take our forage systems research area and convert this into a setup that we could test the same sort of design in our environment and with fall calving cows. So in the forage systems grazing area, we've got 12 different experimental units. These are 16-acre pastures with 8 cows that are stocked on these grazing systems every year. They're different experimental units have different management styles. So 3 of them are continuously stocked. In other words, the cows can go anywhere within their 16-acre unit throughout the grazing season. 6 of them are rotationally stocked in 8 paddock grazing systems, and then another 3 are also rotationally stocked in a slightly different design. And so we've been going through a 3-year process to convert some of the forage and different paddocks to provide us with this opportunity to test these types of grazing systems. So whether the animals are grazing completely toxic tall fescue throughout most of the year, whether they're grazing completely novel endophyte or non-toxic tall fescue, and then we'll have some grazing systems where a quarter of the acreage has been converted to novel endophyte, and then we'll use those strategically to see how that impacts animal productivity. So potentially a lot of opportunity for collaboration and engagement on different levels as we create the infrastructure and the forage systems for this work. Initially, we'll of course be tracking productivity and animal welfare, but I'm certainly interested in trying to find other collaborators who want to engage on this project and look at other health markers or whatever characteristics that may be interesting to them. Silvopasture is another area of interest that we are doing more work in here at the AREC. Silvopasture is an integration of forestry and pasture together, using the interaction between trees, forages, and livestock to try to manage them for more productive outcomes from each component. Here's a number of benefits. I won't spend too much time on them, just to say that, as you can imagine, one of the main draws for silvopasture in our region would be shade, the opportunity of having shade in a pasture for livestock. Here's a picture of where I did my graduate work. This is Kentland Farm in Blacksburg. I worked with sheep in hardwood silvopastures there, so this gives you a sense of what that integration of trees and pasture together looks like. I also worked in Blackstone at the Southern Piedmont AREC a number of years ago, and this is a system that I worked with at that AREC. So we've got silvopasture at various locations in the Ag Experiment Station network throughout Virginia. These are some data that we found out of Blackstone at the Southern Piedmont AREC, working with cattle in these open pastures versus pine and hardwood silvopastures. Essentially no difference in animal production statistically from these different types of systems. So in other words, these silvopastures are able to produce the same animal output, same live weight gains as the open pastures, and in addition, you get whatever the timber provides, whether that's timber or non-timber forest products from the trees. So there's some large production benefits potential from silvopasture as well. But as I mentioned, shade is a primary concern for farmers throughout Virginia, especially farmers that are utilizing tall fescue. And so as they think about how do I get shade into my system, whether that's artificial or natural, silvopasture provides an opportunity to also increase land productivity and create a product that increases in value over time. These are some thermal imagery that we collected from the study in Blackstone of cattle in a civil pasture there on the right compared to cattle in an open pasture there on the left. And this illustrates the intense heat load when animals don't have access to shade, particularly in Southside Virginia. These are the actual data. This is high temperature. So this is when we actually look at what is the temperature on the surface of those heifers, whether they're in the open system in the afternoon and morning, which are the top versus lower data figures here or data points here, and then compare them to heifers that are in the pine and hardwood silvopastures. And what we saw was that the high temperature on those animals that are in the open fields are over 120 degrees Fahrenheit on the back of those animals in the afternoon, which is almost 20 degrees different from the high temperature of those animals that have access to shade in the silvopasture. Again, here's vaginal temperature data. Again, just showing that even core body temperatures are significantly affected. Those animals without access to shade are exhibiting low-grade fevers over 104 degree Fahrenheit temperature in the afternoon, which is a whole degree higher than the body temperatures of animals that have access to shade there in the black lines. So we are trying to integrate some silvopasture in various locations on the farm here. There are two ways essentially to get there. One is clearing forest and establishing forages underneath the trees that have been thinned. And we've done that here, as well as tried to plant and establish pastures or plant and establish trees into existing pastures. One of the primary challenges, though, is cattle, if they have access to small trees, or even if deer have access to the trees without any protection, it's hard to get those trees to grow. Eventually, they'll be browsed or trampled. And so we've experimented with different methods of protecting trees in pastures that we still have stocked with livestock. We've also tried planting trees directly into pastures, and then used various types of fencing arrangements to keep the cattle from trampling on those trees. And we've had various levels of success with different designs. More recently, this past spring, we've done a larger planting of several hundred trees in a pasture system, looking more intensively at different types of electric fencing and how we can keep livestock and deer off of trees successfully on a larger scale. So those are two areas of interest that we're working towards over the next number of years in our forage systems and more farm part of the farm. But also wanted to introduce just here in a second, Dr. Tracy. Dr. Tracy has done a lot of work here at the AREC over the past couple of decades, specifically with native warm season grasses, and then also more recently integrating flowering plants into grazing systems. And so I'm going to have him provide a little overview of what some of the work that he's done. Following that with Adam Downing. Adam Downing is a area extension agent dealing specifically with forestry, and Adam has been really influential in managing the remaining third of our farm that is in forest. There's many different tracts of woodlands that have been managed for demonstration and research purposes. And Adam has been key in making all of that happen on the forestry side. So Adam's going to follow Ben with a brief overview of some of the forestry programs as well. So with that, Ben, I'll hand it over to you if you're able to share your screen. If you have slides.
I actually was just going to use your slide there.
Okay, I'll go back.
I didn't know if you wanted me to share anything on my end, but I could just describe some of the work that we've been doing over the last, well, the more recent work here. I mean, I've been working at Shenandoah Valley, as Gabe said, for almost close to 20 years now. But most recently, we've been working on a project associated with this nutrient management area on the station, circled in, I guess that's yellow. I think that's yellow. Yeah, kind of a yellowish color. And we've kind of turned this the bee-friendly beef project, where we've been trying to integrate native warm season grasses and wildflowers into tall fescue pastures as a way to do two things, to diversify pastures, to improve cattle health and performance by adding the native warm season grasses, and then also the wildflowers to benefit pollinator populations. And we've completed several studies, but one grazing study that we did there at the nutrient management area, we had treatments where we had pastures that were planted to native warm season grasses, a small proportion of wildflowers, and the rest of the pasture was endophyte infected tall fescue. We compared cattle weight gain, and we also measured body temperature in the cattle over a 3-year period. And compared with our control, just straight tall fescue, toxic tall fescue pasture, every year, really pretty consistently, there was higher weight gain on these biodiverse pastures planted with native grasses and wildflowers. It was actually pretty surprising to me. I didn't think the results would be that clear and that consistent. So it was really kind of evidence to show, again, having an alternative forage for cattle in the summertime to get them off of the toxic fescue can really translate into some positive, at least animal performance. And also, like Gabe been showing, my student Jonathan Kubesh, who finished his PhD on that project, also measured body temperature in heifers. And we also found, at least during the hottest part of the day, body temperature in cattle in the biodiverse treatments was actually significantly lower compared to the control pastures as well. So again, evidence to maybe suggest that having these alternative forages also helps with some of those vasoconstriction issues that Gabe was talking about, and may alleviate some heat stress as well. So that was some of the results we had. And not surprisingly, we also did pollinator surveys, and when you integrate native wildflowers into these pastures, we also typically have about 3 to 4 times more pollinators in those biodiverse pastures compared to just straight tall fescue. So there seems to be some benefit there, with the key kind of result that you can plant some of these wildflowers and it actually doesn't detract or reduce animal performance in any way. So that was an important kind of a non-result, but a result just the same, kind of like what Gabe was showing with the weight gain across those silvopasture treatments. And what we're transitioning into now in that nutrient management area is a question that I've had for many years. Collaborate a lot with Pat Kaiser, who from the University of Tennessee does a lot of work with native grasses. And we always, when we do programs and workshops together, we always get questions. Well, these native grasses have some real benefits, but really, how much of our pasture should we devote to native warm season grasses to see these benefits? And with our study we just completed, that was about 25% of the pasture area devoted to native grasses in the summertime. That seemed to produce some positive effects. But the next study, what we want to do is more of a long-term study where we're varying the proportion of native warm season grasses in the summer grazing system. And what we wanted to see, and this is designed to be at least a 10-year study, is over time, what proportion really gives the most stable results and the most consistent animal performance and forest stability and stability in species composition and other things. So we actually have 4 treatments where ranging from relatively very high amounts, a high proportion of native warm season grasses, so that's like 70%, down to 15% of the pasture in native warm season grasses compared with cool season and tall fescue. So that's what we're just starting that study this year. And so maybe 10 years from now, I'll come back and give you another update to see how those results shook out. So that's really all I had about my just a brief summary of some of the things that we've been working on recently there.
Excellent. Thank you, Ben. Thanks for that overview. That was good. And we also just recently, I guess it was this past or a week ago, had a field day with the Natural Bridge Soil and Water District, one of our local districts, and the Virginia Forage and Grassland Council, and had an event focused on native grasses. And so Ben was able to make it up for that event as well, and we were able to tour some of the sites on the farm. So those types of outreach events always go hand in hand with the different research projects that we have, and they're very important to our function here. So thank you, Ben, for that overview. And with that, I will transition now to Adam, who again will talk about some of his work on the forestry side.
Thanks, Gabe. Thank you, everybody, for being here. So Gabe mentioned that about a third of the farm is in woodlands, and that's very typical of farms across the Commonwealth. And so that it provides a great opportunity to demonstrate and show that farms can be and should be managed as part of a whole farm operation. And so it's been great to work with Gabe and his predecessor, David Fisk, and doing different forestry demonstration and management activities across the farm. So we're going to take a quick walk through the woods, so to speak. You don't have to put on your tick spray for this walk in the woods. I'm going to give you an overview of some of the recent things that we've done, and also some context. If you were to visit the farm a few years ago, you would have seen some big equipment active and some timber harvesting. Timber harvesting can be a great tool to accomplish silviculture, which is the art and science of tending a forest stand. When you see timber harvesting, it may or may not be silviculture, but what we're doing at McCormick Farm is silviculture to meet certain goals and objectives with regard to regeneration, as well as for the farm. So I'm going to share with you, first of all, these 4 stands that were harvested in 2021. And we're going to start with a foundation property that was about 11 acres, and then 3 other stands that are university owned that add up to about 74 acres. And then I'm going to back up a little bit and give you a little broader view of things and a little history of why we're doing what we're doing, because forests are a long-lived crop. And so what we inherited from the past land use and utilization of the woodlands is what we're working with. So this bright green that's denoted as stand D6, that's that 11-acre area. That is right up against a residential area that you can see on the left. And we clear cut that and planted that into pines to be one of the silvopasture spots on the farm. It was had been high graded over the years, had some really great big trees in it, but not a lot happening in the understory. And in terms of kind of integrating it into the whole farm, it was a little bit isolated in terms of keeping it in traditional forest management. And so the decision was made a few years ago to go ahead and clear cut that. We've got it planted in pines. And in spite of 2 years of drought, the pines are looking pretty good. We planted fast growing loblolly pines, which is not very commonly done in the Shenandoah Valley. So part of it is demonstration, and and just see what happens when it comes to ice and rain events, which can be problematic for pine. The other 4 tracks are shown here in the light green. I'll talk about the 2 smaller ones on the right-hand side first. In the upper right is a little less than 6-acre clear cut that similarly was just sort of hanging out there and not being actively managed, but it adjoined something that was clear cut a number of years ago and was planted a pine. I'll talk about that in a little bit. So we decided to clear cut this and plant that in pine to sort of combine it with a larger pine stand that could be more effectively managed as a larger unit. And then what's called B4 down there below on the right-hand side was there's a little bit of that on the end, just a couple acres that was clear cut. And the rest of it, there's an improvement thinning that was done back in 2021. And that bigger piece that you see in the upper right-hand corner, that is one of my pride and joys. It's called the Fimmelschlag. And that's the fancy German word for something that we would refer to as an expanding gap. It's a silvicultural tool that is just becoming coming to our awareness here in North America. It's been used in Germany for quite a long time. And in our case, it's all about trying to get oak back, which has been a big challenge across the state, across the eastern U.S., is to regenerate oak. Oak is a dominant overstory species, but lacking in the understory. And so we're not going to have oak forests in the future in a lot of these places for various reasons. But here we're going to try to get oak coming back in the understory. And so it's about a 50-acre stand, and we cut gaps. I mentioned that it's an expanding gap. So the initial gap is about 1 acre in size. Some of them are shaped like rectangles, and some of them are circles, which we affectionately call blobs. And so those gaps are created, and along the edge of that, where there's a lower light level, is where we're hoping that the oak will come in. Oak competes best with against other species in a moderate light environment. And so once oak is established in these areas, then it would expand to create more edge where more oak can establish, and so on. The other unique aspect about Fimmelschlag, or expanding gap, is a permanent road network, because this requires more frequent entries into the stand for silvicultural activities than our other traditional silvicultural tools. And so there's a road that goes basically through the middle of the stand and up to the top of it. And it's a beautiful stand, hadn't been done anything with for a long time. And so we're excited for what's happening there. In addition, the Forest Service has an active research project there where they've actually planted oak, and see how that does. And we'll see. Deer are part of the challenge with that. But in addition to, generally speaking, when you plant a tree in a natural system, it is going to be outcompeted. But we've got some different genetics that were planted in larger trees. So stepping back a little bit, a bunch of forest management activities have happened here in this current year, thanks to a great relationship that we have enjoyed for many years with the Virginia Department of Forestry. So we've done merchandise thinning. This is an effort to sort of see what the bottom threshold is economically to be able to get some management done. It's not going to make money for the landowner, but is it valuable enough that you can get an operator in there to improve that, so that you do have some better value going forward? We've done some crop tree release as well. Some mid-story removals where you're trying to change the light dynamic in the understory by taking out the shade that's in that that's not in that dominant overstory but is beneath that, to open up the floor for natural regeneration. And we're always dealing with some cull trees, the trees we don't want, such as tree of heaven and Paulownia, both non-native invasive species that quickly occupy space if they're given that. So the merchandise thinning is happening in these 2 stands. That is actually just wrapped up. We're doing a couple of different things with the after effects of that, to include a forest mulcher to open up the ground and see if we can get some desirable regeneration that way. The crop tree release is happening here. I was very excited. About a year ago, I guess, I walked some of these stands, and some of our earlier activities had opened things up, and we actually got some oak that regenerated that are sapling size. And so those trees have been released so that they have a better chance of staying in the stand for the next 100 or so years and not get outcompeted by faster growing species surrounding them. The mid-story removal happened in these stands, D1, 3, and 4, and that's to, again, open up that forest floor for regeneration. And we're also going to have another activity, a hot one, coming up, hopefully. I'll touch base on that here in a minute. And then the culture removal happened largely in this stand. Gabe mentioned that I-81 runs right through the farm, so this is the stand on the left-hand side of this picture that is on the other side of Interstate 81. So looking a little bit more closely at D6, what's happened there in the past? Well, the McCormicks, like many farmers of the time, and frankly, many farmers still today, use the woods to get firewood and other on-farm uses. And so it had been just kind of picked and chosen from for many years. And this is where we clear cut and establish pines for silvopasture. Before the pines are planted, an aerial site prep, meaning aircraft flew over the area and dropped herbicide to kill everything off so that the planted pines can more quickly and readily get established. Here's these D stands that I mentioned, and I've bolded some of the current activities that have happened or are going to happen. And I've already touched base on those other than that flame that you see in D4. So there's a very thick forest floor covering of oak leaves, which are great for burning. But if it gets too thick, it creates a situation where the acorns don't even get down to the soil to have a chance of becoming the next oak forest. And so we're hoping to do an understory burn in this stand over the next few years, probably repeated burns to create conditions more suitable for oak regeneration, and working with the Department of Forestry. I mentioned crop tree release. This is the stand, one of the stands where that has happened. And it's happened there because we found some oak trees that had regenerated from our earlier patch and selection cut silvicultural activities there in 2014. In this stand, and I'm sorry for the small type here, but you're on the screen, not in a big room, so hopefully you can read it. B1 and B2, there's been some research from Virginia Tech in partnership with other universities such as Penn State, looking for biological control of Ailanthus, or otherwise known as tree of heaven. So there's a great fungus that can kill this tree. And so a researcher from Virginia Tech came up and established plots in these to test 2 different strains of verticillium. And so we're excited that that's still on the property, and it is killing a lot of the trees that we would otherwise have to go in with herbicides and treat. And also the crop tree release there on the northern half of B2, or the upper part. These pictures are roughly oriented north to south. Had some crop tree release, and then that mulching activity, which is basically like a big stump grinder but on a drum rather than a cylinder, that will go through and reduce the competition, open things up, and hopefully we get some better regeneration coming in underneath that. Interesting, the American chestnut always gets a lot of attention, and because of the brand value of Virginia Tech, we were able, when no one else was, to get some American chestnut trees planted there. They are behind a deer fence, keeping the deer away, and there are still some trees. Some of them have succumbed to the chestnut blight. Some of them actively have the blight, but there are some American chestnut trees on the farm, which is one of our bragging rights. And then we got B3 and B4. These are some of the just another stand. In forestry, we break the forest up into sufficiently uniform stands that are treated differently. So the species, the age, that's what kind of defines the stand. And then B5 is a new stand that's not on our existing maps, but that's that little clear cut that went along with a clear cut across the road and was planted into pine because there just wasn't anything. It didn't have a lot of positive prospects otherwise. Right across the road from that little square that I just showed you are the stands that are in the A group, and A1 was harvested and planted in pine in 2010 with different species. That's that chart you see on the right-hand side with all those squares, roughly 1 acre in size. So those different squares have different species and different densities. And I mentioned early on that pine is not commonly planted in the Shenandoah Valley. I should qualify that as saying southern yellow pine. White pine has been planted, but has very little in terms of market value. Southern yellow pine is what makes the southeastern U.S. the timber basket of the country. And so we've planted different southern yellow pines in here and seen how they perform. Some of them are crosses between two different southern yellow pine species and at different densities. To see how they perform, but also just to show landowners that, hey, you actually can plant pines in the Shenandoah Valley, which gives them an option of a faster return on investment than hardwood forest. And then A3, that was added to this whole pine block now with a planting in 2023. Gabe mentioned a lot of visitors to the property, and one of the reasons there's a lot of visitors is because there's a really great nature trail. And it goes along the mill pond from the historic core there, and it's just an out and back loop. And a lot of people come and walk their dogs. There are signs along the way. It's called the Marl Creek Nature Trail, and that was put in by a volunteer retired Forest Service forester who's still active on the property and is quite a force to be reckoned with. Has frankly made a lot of things happen forestry wise at McCormick Farm well before I arrived. And then across from that that nature trail is a little triangle area, almost 5 acres, where our first silvopasture efforts at McCormick Farm occurred, and that was by taking a degraded hardwood stand and turn excuse me, turn it into silvopasture. That happened in 2014. Here you see a picture of John Fike and David Fisk contemplating the value of this. But it's been great to be able to show people what a silvopasture looks like. Silvopasture has a lot of confusion amongst agricultural producers. It is not turning animals loose in the woods. It's also not just a few random trees in the field. It's very intentional, as Gabe mentioned earlier. And then across the highway, across 81, is that nearly 50-acre stand with mixed hardwoods. We've done some patch and selection cuts there. Not dissimilar to what I talked about earlier with the Fimmelschlag. The difference is that it does not have a permanent road network, but the aim was to try to get oak regeneration. That has not happened. We have continued to work with what we've got, and particularly beating back the invasive species, tree of heaven, paulownia, and various shrubs as well. And with that, that was my last slide. And of course, if there are any questions, there's your answer. But I'll turn it back over to Gabe and our host.
Thank you, Adam. Appreciate it. And thank you for your work here. Adam really drives the forestry programs here in partnership with Department of Forestry and now the Forest Service. So I'm very thankful for them and for their leadership in these efforts. So now just wrapping up real quickly, I do want to mention we're also the host of the Virginia Ram Lamb performance test. So this happens every year during the summertime in our ram testing facility. This is the longest continuously operated ram test in the country. This year will be the 50th test and sale. So this is also a big part of what we do. This is what the sale day looks like. Usually 150 to 200 people show up. And we auction off around 50 rams or so from the test. And then, of course, we talked a lot about research and demonstration, but all of that is important because of the farmers and the stakeholders, the landowners that we serve. And so having events out here on a regular basis has been very important to share what we're doing on a larger scale. This is an example of a fencing school we hosted last year in partnership with the Forage and Grassland Council. Also a stockmanship clinic that we did with Kirk Pate. And then different members of our team, including faculty, will also travel to various farms throughout Virginia, helping extension agents and others with on-farm pasture walks and other events. So with that, just want to conclude with a couple upcoming events. As I mentioned, our Ram sales coming up this August the 23rd will be our 50th sale. We also have an outreach event where we celebrate the history and commemorate the invention of the Reaper every first Saturday in October. So Mill Day will be on October 4th this year. So feel free to come out and enjoy that event. And then we also have a silvopasture training event coming up in July. So went through that very rapidly. I don't know, Suzanne, if there's much time left for questions, but wanted to open it up and turn it back to you.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much to all three of our speakers today. We really appreciate your time. And if there are any questions, we could take a minute or two for those. I'm not seeing anything in the chat. But before we go, I just want to share a couple of other dates, and I'm going to drop some links in the chat for you all. The next AREC seminar will be the Tidewater AREC seminar on June 27th. And I just dropped in a link that will take you to the AREC seminar series page. This page hosts all of the previous recordings for all of the other sessions. And I should have today's session linked to that page probably Monday. But the dates for the June session are on there. And then, of course, all of the other recordings. And just quickly before we go, we have some June and July field days coming up. And I'm also going to drop that information in the chat in case you want to bookmark these links. We've got at the Hampton Roads AREC in June, they have 2 field days coming up. The Berry Field Day on June 4th, and their Turf Grass Field Day is on June 26th. And there is a link there in the chat to their event page with information about both of those field days. And then if you're able to join us in July at the Tidewater AREC, we will be having an inaugural corn and soybean twilight tour. The Facebook event link is there in the chat. That also contains the registration link. If you're interested, please register and come on out to see us. And then later in July, the Southern Piedmont AREC will have its row crops field day. And I don't have specific information on that yet other than the date, but you can check back with this link that I've posted here and we'll be updating that. And let me just give you one more thing while we're at it. This is the statewide field day calendar link. So this will give you all of the statewide dates for all the field days coming up for the rest of the year. So hopefully you can find one near you and come on out and join us for those. Otherwise, that's all I have. Still not seeing any questions in the chat, so I think we're good.
Sounds good. Thank you all for coming.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Take care.